The first thing Envoy 3rd Sivith noticed about Earth was that it was trying to kill itself. Not metaphorically. The planet's atmosphere was in a constant state of chemical warfare with its own surface. Oxygen, reactive, corrosive, genuinely dangerous to half the materials aboard. Careful inquiry was simply loose out there, not contained, not regulated, just drifting around in 21% concentrations, setting things on fire when it felt like it, rusting every exposed metal surface into a ruddy, flaking catastrophe. Sivith had filed 3 separate sensor queries before accepting that the readings were not a malfunction. She pressed 3 of her 6 fingers against the viewport glass and watched the third planet rotate in patient, enormous indifference. "Tevak," she called across the observation deck. "The atmospheric composition report, the preliminary one. Is there an error on line 47? Tevak, her cartography assistant, was coiled around the warmth of a data pillar, the amber rings along his crest glowing softly in the recycled light. He uncoiled one careful loop and checked his pad. "No, error," he said. "That's correct. The nitrogen-oxygen ratio is stable. It's been stable for approximately 2.3 billion standard cycles. Well, 1. They just left it like that. The planet did not make a deliberate choice, Envoy." Sivith removed her fingers from the glass. There were oval smudges where they had been 6 of them, slightly iridescent. She had a nervous habit of touching viewports during difficult surveys. She'd already gone through 2 bottles of glass polish on this expedition. "The gravity," she said. 1.02 standard, nearly textbook. The surface temperature variance, 83 degrees between the equatorial and polar regions. And yet, Tevak agreed. Because there was no other response to make. Life had not just survived on this world, it had exploded. The preliminary biosurveys showed megafauna in every biome. The oceans were a riot of predation and bioluminescence and inexplicable cooperation. There were creatures on this planet that should not, by any reasonable assessment of physics and ecology, be alive. And in the most bewildering corner of this bewildering world, in the narrow habitable band between ice and heat, a species had built cities. Sivith had been an Envoy 3rd for 19 cycles. She'd surveyed 14 worlds. Nothing in those 14 surveys had prepared her for the file now open on her primary screen. Preliminary contact assessment. Species designation. Terran primate. Colloquial. Human. The assessment was 40 pages long. She had read it twice. She still didn't fully believe it. "We're cleared for the initial descent?" she asked. "Atmospheric shuttle is prepped. The humans have been notified through their low-band radio spectrum. They sent back a response in 11 of their languages." What did it say? Tevak's crest rings flickered in what Sivith had learned to read as his version of bewilderment. Several translations are still processing, but the consensus meaning appears to be, "Please come. We've been hoping someone would." Sivith picked up her contact pack from the shelf by the door. It contained her translation membrane, her atmospheric conversion kit, and 3 different diplomatic texts that she would probably not need. She paused at the door. "Tevak, have you read the thermal regulation section of the bioreport?" "I have. They're endothermic." "Yes. They maintain a fixed internal temperature regardless of external conditions. They do this using stored chemical energy. They burn their own reserves to stay warm." "That is an accurate summary, yes." Sivith thought about this for a moment, the sheer metabolic extravagance of it. The commitment required. The cost. Then she put on her contact pack and walked toward the shuttle bay, because there was work to do, and because the viewport wasn't going to tell her anything that the surface couldn't. The shuttle broke atmosphere at 1700 local hours. Through the window, Sivith watched clouds, actual suspended water vapor. Uncontrolled. Simply existing in the open air part, around the hull. The planet grew. Brown and green and blue in proportions that should have been wrong but somehow weren't. A human was waiting for them on the landing platform. It was smaller than Siveth had expected. The bio reports had given her dimensions, but dimensions on a page and a living thing standing in open air were different propositions. The human was upright bipedal, which she had known, but the reality of 2 limbs for locomotion and 2 for manipulation, all at once, simultaneously, was faintly alarming. It wore layers of woven material despite the ambient temperature being well within normal range. Its face was doing something complicated with its muscles. Siveth's translation membrane warmed against her throat. "Hello," the human said. Its voice was in a frequency range that vibrated Siveth's secondary hearing membranes in a mildly uncomfortable way, too much resonance in the upper registers. "My name is Ren Adeyemi. I'm the contact liaison for the Terran First Contact Office." Siveth descended the shuttle ramp and felt the gravity settle into her bones like a familiar weight, almost right, almost comfortable, with a quarter-degree wrongness she'd probably stop noticing in a day. The air smelled like iron and growing things and, faintly, something burning. She breathed through her conversion kit and tried not to think about the oxygen. "Envoy 3rd Siveth," she said, "of the Survey Collective. Thank you for the landing coordinates. Thank you for coming." The human Ren was still doing the complicated thing with its face. Siveth's cultural briefing eventually supplied the term. Smiling. A social signal involving exposed dental structures. Technically, a dominance display, historically speaking, though current usage had apparently drifted toward warmth. The distinction, the briefing noted, was context-dependent. "Your world," Siveth said carefully, because she was a professional and there were protocols. "Terrifying?" Ren offered. Siveth paused. "I was going to say lively." Ren made a sound, a short exhale, rhythmic that her membrane translated as laughter. Siveth didn't know what T was. She followed anyway, because that was also protocol. And because Ren Adeyemi walked toward the building at the edge of the platform with the easy confidence of a creature that had never, in its entire evolutionary history, considered the possibility that the ground might not be safe. It was, Siveth thought, possibly the strangest thing she had ever seen. She filed it under observations requiring further study and followed the human inside. The building was warmer than the outside, which Siveth had not thought was possible given that the outside was already warm by her species standards. There was a machine in the corner, producing steam water vapor, again, just released into the air as though this were normal, and a smell that her olfactory clusters couldn't categorize except as old and brown, and somehow reassuring in a way she did not understand. Ren Adeyemi filled 2 vessels with the steaming liquid. One vessel was set in front of Siveth with a gesture that her briefing identified as offering. "You don't have to drink it," Ren said. "I know your atmospheric kit processes external inputs differently." But a pause, a small uncertainty that Siveth found more comforting than any amount of composure would have been, "The gesture is the point, I think. That's what my grandmother always said." Siveth looked at the tea. It was dark and still and faintly iridescent where the steam touched it. She did not pick it up. She did, however, move it a centimeter to the left, so it was closer to her, which was close enough to acceptance that she felt the etiquette gap close between them like an airlock ceiling. "Your grandmother," Siveth said. "The best one." Ren curled both hands around its own vessel. Its fingers were remarkable, 5 of them, with this extravagant range of articulation, the knuckles moving through dozens of small adjustments as it settled its grip. The hands of something that had spent its evolution grasping things, making things, holding things. "She's the one who told me to apply for this job. She said if aliens ever came, we should make them feel at home." A pause. "I told her, we don't know what home feels like for aliens." "What did she say?" "She said, so you make them feel like guests who are wanted." Ren looked at Siveth over the rim of the vessel. "Is it working?" Siveth considered the question with the full diplomatic weight it deserved. "It is not working," she said, which was, For her species, a significant statement. The translation membrane caught the shift in Ren's expression and categorized it as pleased and trying not to show it. They sat. Outside, something moved in the tree analogues at the edge of the platform. A flash of something small and fast, brown and alarmed. The sound it produced was high-pitched and sharp and entirely unregulated, and it did whatever it was doing with full commitment to the existence of predators. A bird, Ren said, following Sivith's gaze. Sparrow, probably. They nest in the eaves. It looked at the creature with an expression her membrane rendered as fond. We tried to remove them once, years back. They just came back. Eventually, the building managers gave up. A brief pause. We tend to do that. Give up on removing things that just want to exist somewhere. Sivith had done her reading on the concept of pest management. The human record on the subject was, charitably speaking, inconsistent. They drove some species to extinction without meaning to, and then spent considerable resources mourning them. They shared their habitations with dozens of uninvited organisms and developed elaborate affection for some of them. They transplanted foreign species to new continents and then expressed surprise at the consequences. There was a pattern in it that her preliminary analysis had been unable to fully name. She thought about it while Ren drank its tea and thought it might be something like, they keep reaching out, even when they probably shouldn't. I have a question, Sivith said. It may not be appropriate for a first meeting. Go ahead, Ren said. Your planet has a moon that is gravitationally destabilizing. Ren blinked. I'm sorry? Your moon. Relative to your planet's mass, it is anomalously large. It creates tidal stresses in your mantle. It shifts your axial tilt over long timescales. It is, by the measurements of 4 separate survey teams over the past 3 centuries, not where a moon should be. Oh, Ren said. Yeah, we know. It looked out the window, as though the moon might be visible in the daytime. We wrote a lot of poems about it. Sivith waited. And a lot of songs, Ren added. And some religions. And we track it very carefully because it affects the tides, which affects the fish, which affects everything, really. It's in everything. A small pause. Was that your question? Whether we knew? I think, Sivith said slowly, my question was whether it concerned you. Ren considered this with a sincerity that Sivith found almost startling, the way it sat with the question, rather than deflecting it. Turning it over with visible attention. On a geological timescale. Sure, it said finally. But not really right now. Right now it's just ours. You know? It's always been there. It's part of how we navigate. Part of how we measure a month. It's set down its tea. Do you have a moon, Envoy? 3, Sivith said. None of them large. Do you have a word for that feeling? When you look at it in the dark, and you feel like the universe is very big, and you are very small. But somehow, that's okay? That's the right feeling? Sivith did not have such a word. She searched the diplomatic library in her membrane, and found nothing close. We call it Veth Isara, she said, constructing something on the spot from her own language's pieces, space, and held, and the suffix for a feeling that moves through you rather than staying. Roughly. It doesn't translate well. Ren repeated the syllables back, badly, and then tried again, worse. It looked delighted by its own failure. I like that, it said. Can I use it? You can try, Sivith said, which was as close to yes as honesty would allow. It was going well, all things considered. Sivith was beginning to construct a preliminary theory about what humans were: curious, adaptable, prone to reaching, prone to naming things as a form of keeping them. Then the alert went off. It came from her secondary communicator, a sharp pulse that meant Tavak was transmitting from careful inquiry with something that could not wait for the session to finish. Sivith raised one hand to Ren in a gesture she hoped communicated a moment and stepped away from the table. Envoy, Tavok's voice carried the particular flatness of someone delivering information they would have preferred not to have received. We're picking up an unregistered signature. Transit class. Hull profile matches a Krithavi salvage vessel. Sivith's membrane cooled 3 degrees. The Krithavi weren't signatories to survey collective contact protocols. They were not, technically speaking, supposed to be in this sector at all. And a pre-contact planet with no registered status in the collective archives was, under Krithavi salvage law, fair territory. Can they land? They're already adjusting trajectory. Sivith turned back toward the table. Ren Adeyemi was watching her with the particular attention of someone who understood that something had changed in the room, even without knowing what. Both hands were still around the T-vessel, but the grip had shifted tighter. Ready. The membrane, helpfully, translated the expression, concerned, and deciding whether to ask. There may be a complication, Sivith said. Ren put down the tea. What kind of complication? And Sivith thought, I have been doing this work for 19 cycles. I know how these moments go. The planet-side human would be ushered somewhere safe. The diplomatic team would handle the Krithavi through proper channels. Everything would be managed at a distance and in accordance with procedure. Another vessel, she said. One that doesn't follow the same protocols that we do. Ren stood up. Both feet on the floor. That easy bipedal balance. Its weight distributed with the unconscious confidence of something that had learned to stand on moving, living, unreliable ground. Tell me what they want, Ren said. This, Sivith thought, is not how these moments usually go. The Krithavi made contact over the open planetary band at what Ren's people called 4 in the morning, which meant Sivith was standing in a borrowed room in the contact facility, while the lights in the tree analogs outside flickered with whatever small lives conducted themselves in the dark, and Ren Adeyemi was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a datapad, a cold cup of the tea she kept forgetting to drink, and an expression of focused attention that Sivith was beginning to recognize as the human equivalent of, I am going to solve this, or I am going to break trying. The Krithavi transmission was standard salvage claim language. Sivith had heard it before. The planet was unregistered, unclaimed under collective convention, and the Krithavi vessel advantageous position, a name that told you everything you needed to know about its crew's philosophy, was hereby filing preliminary extraction rights on the basis of first contact precedent. Except Sivith's team had arrived first, which the Krithavi knew. Which was why the transmission included 3 clauses of legal text about the distinctions between survey contact and formal registration, all of which were technically accurate and practically devastating. They want the planet, Ren said. She didn't say it with alarm. She said it the way someone says the roof is leaking a problem that existed, requiring address. They want the resource designation, Sivith said carefully. Under Krithavi law, an unregistered world is, but it's our world, Ren said. Legally, it has not been established as anyone's world under collective convention. The registration process requires a formal petition, which requires a sponsor within the collective, which requires you, Ren said. My authority as Envoy Third does not extend to... No, I mean you. Ren looked up from the datapad. Your collective. You're here. Can't you just say something? I can file a preliminary objection, Sivith said, which will hold for 48 standard hours while the collective's legal apparatus reviews the case. After that, if no registration is in process, the Krithavi claim advances. Ren was quiet for 3 seconds. Long enough that Sivith registered it as thinking, not silence. What does registration require? Ren said. Specifically, Sivith pulled up the file she had not expected to need until the 3rd or 4th meeting, at the earliest. A formal petition. Documentation of indigenous sapient life meeting the collective's criteria for recognized sentience. A collective member's sponsorship. Cultural survey data sufficient to establish. How much of that do you have? Sivith stopped. She looked at the files on her secondary screen. the ones she had been compiling since careful inquiry entered the system, because that was her job. Because even a preliminary survey included preliminary documentation. Because envoy thirds didn't show up to new systems without doing their reading. She had 40 pages of preliminary assessment. She had thermal mapping, atmospheric surveys, infrastructure analysis, communications, intercepts that the collective's cultural division had already begun processing. She had 17 hours of footage from 3 different observation angles. She had the conversation log from the afternoon, including a 6-minute section in which a human had asked her if she had a word for the feeling of smallness that was also rightness. Most of it, she said. Ren stood up. The datapad went under one arm. Okay, she said. Show me what you're missing. What followed was, Sivith would later tell Tevek, the most productive 47 hours of her career, which was not something she had expected to be able to say about a crisis. Ren moved through the facility, and then through the city outside it, with a forward momentum that reminded Sivith uncomfortably of the pursuit predators in the bio report, not aggressive, but committed, with a destination and the assumption that the terrain would cooperate. She knew everyone in the building by name, and had opinions about all of them. She stopped to explain the situation to her team in a corridor at 2 in the morning, and the explanation took 4 minutes and ended with 7 humans, redistributing their schedules to make documentation happen faster. She did not order them, she asked. They said yes. The cultural survey data came in sections. A linguist named Flores filed recordings of 47 distinct language families, annotated with notes in 3 of them. A historian named Callahan contributed a digital archive that took Sivith's secondary processor 40 minutes to index. Ren herself, while eating things that she kept handing to Sivith's translator for analysis, while sitting on the floor of the facility's archive room at 3 in the morning, surrounded by light panels and data cables, wrote the section on human adaptive capacity. Sivith read it over her shoulder. We have lived above the Arctic Circle and in the Sahara Desert and at the bottom of the sea, and now, in small numbers, at the edge of our atmosphere, it said. We have rebuilt after floods and fires and the mass deaths of our own people. We have failed many times at being good to each other and started over. That is possibly the most human thing we know how to do. Not be done. Is that too much? Ren asked, not looking up from her screen. It's accurate, Sivith said. Ren made the short exhale that was laughter. That's not what I asked. Sivith considered the cultural weight of the passage the claim it made. Not about human strength, but about human endurance. The way it didn't reach for glory, but for something more uncomfortable and more honest. No, she said. It is not too much. The objection filing went in at 39 hours. The preliminary registration petition followed at 43. At 46 hours and 22 minutes, Sivith received a transmission from the collective's legal division, confirming receipt and provisional hold, pending review. Ren was asleep in the archive room, curled on a repurposed floor cushion, the datapad still in her hand. 2 of her colleagues, Flores and a technician whose name Sivith had not yet learned, were asleep nearby, heads tilted at the particular angle of people who had stopped in the middle of doing something and hadn't made it to horizontal. Sivith stood in the doorway and looked at them. The sparrow that had been living in the eaves of the facility had somehow gotten inside. It was perched on top of a light panel, small and brown, and utterly unimpressed by the events of the past 2 days. It regarded Sivith with one bright eye, decided she was not relevant, and cleaned its beak on the panel's edge. Sivith filed her field report. She included the sparrow. She was beginning to understand that with humans, the small details were never irrelevant. The advantageous position did not leave. Sivith had not expected it to the provisional hold bought time, not resolution, and Captain Vrethk of the Krethavi was not the kind of person who mistook bureaucratic delays for permanent obstacles. She'd dealt with Vrethk twice before. He was thorough, patient, and had built a career on understanding exactly where the law bent without breaking. He sent a second transmission at hour 51. This one was not in legal language. It was addressed directly to Sivith, and it was brief. provisional holds expire. Registration petitions are reviewed by committees who take their time. We will wait. Ren read the transmission over Sivith's shoulder she had developed, without asking permission, a habit of appearing at Sivith's elbow whenever something significant was happening, which Sivith found less annoying than she had expected. He's not wrong, Ren said. No, Sivith agreed. How long does registration review take? Typically, 4 to 8 months standard. Sivith watched the data display cycling through the advantageous positions orbital track patient. Slow. A large animal walking around something it expected to eat eventually. Krithavi's salvage crews can wait out provisional holds by starting extraction on a different part of the claim area, Ren said. While the legal argument covers the inhabited zones. Sivith looked at her. How do you know that? I read the Krithavi entry in your survey database while you were filing the objection. They do that? Her voice was even, but the hand holding her tea had that tighter-than-normal grip again. Sometimes. It creates enough economic precedent that the legal argument over habitation zones becomes moot. By the time the registration is confirmed, the extraction infrastructure is already in place, and removal becomes a second legal battle. Ren put down the tea. She crossed both arms over her chest, a self-directed containment gesture that the membrane translated as thinking hard and not ready to speak yet. Sivith waited. She had learned that Ren's silences were productive ones. What do they want to extract? Ren said. Rare mass elements. Your planet's mantle composition includes concentrations of materials that are difficult to synthesize and expensive to transport from most sources. A pause. Your asteroid belt is also considerable. I know, Ren said. We've been arguing about mining it for decades. A short, complicated sound, not quite laughter. Never thought we'd be arguing about it with someone who showed up from outside. She looked at the orbital display. If they start extraction in the belt, that establishes the economic claim. It establishes a precedent for the claim. The legal distinction is fine enough that our registration petition gets complicated. Ren nodded slowly. And if we file an injunction against belt extraction? Under collective law, an injunction from an unregistered world requires a collective sponsor to file on your behalf. Which is why you, again, my authority as Envoy Third, does not extend to filing injunctions, I know, you've said. Ren was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, does it extend to requesting that your collective send someone who does have that authority? Sivith considered this. An emergency escalation request. It would require documentation of imminent threat to a sentient population during active contact proceedings. Is that what this is? Sivith thought about the advantageous position in its patient orbit. She thought about Vrithk, who had once waited 11 months for a provisional hold to expire, while conducting entirely legal but conveniently located survey operations. She thought about the asteroid belt and the mantle concentrations, and the fact that the humans didn't have a ship that could reach orbit yet, not quite, not without significant effort, and what that meant about their options. Yes, she said. Ren's expression shifted, something complicated moving through it, more than relief and something harder than gratitude. Write it, she said. Tell me what you need from me, and I'll get it in an hour. Ren. Sivith said the name carefully, aware of what she was doing with it the first time she'd used it without the formal designation. The escalation request may not arrive in time. Even if the collective responds immediately, advantageous position can begin belt operations within 3 days. The injunction process alone. I know. Ren's voice was quiet. Write it anyway. Sivith wrote it. Ren produced, inside an hour, a testimony from 7 separate human governments, a joint statement from the planet's newly convened First Contact Council that had apparently been organized over 14 hours of audio calls while Sivith and Ren were working on the registration petition, and a formal request from the Human Astronomical Monitoring Network that had been tracking Advantageous position since it entered the system, because, Sivith was informed, they tracked everything that entered the system as a matter of course, because they had learned some years ago that the universe did not announce itself before arriving. "How long have you been watching the sky?" Sivith asked, looking at the monitoring network's records. They went back 3 centuries. Unbroken. Multiple redundant systems. Progressively more sophisticated. The coverage had gaps in the early records, but none in the last 50 years. "As long as we've been able to," Ren said. "Longer. Actually, the first people who did it didn't have any equipment at all. They just looked." She paused. "We were always waiting." Sivith sent the escalation request at hour 53. Acknowledgement came back in 6 minutes faster than the standard comms relay should have allowed, which meant someone at the collective's monitoring station had been watching the contact proceedings and had already prepared to receive exactly this kind of message. She was quietly relieved not to be as alone in this as she'd felt 20 minutes ago. The reply contained a single additional line beyond the acknowledgement, flagged informal. From the regional coordinator, whose name she recognized from 7 years of administrative correspondence. "We see it." Holding the line. Sivith read it twice. She hadn't known the regional coordinator well enough to know if this was characteristic. The brevity, the particular choice of phrase, the warmth compressed into 4 words. She found she was grateful for it in a way that surprised her. "Anything?" Ren asked from across the room. "They received it." A pause. They said, Sivith considered how to render it. That they understand the situation. ID. They D. Ren exhaled. Not the short, rhythmic exhale that was laughter. This was something slower. Something that had been held for a while. "Okay," she said. "Okay. What do we do now?" Sivith looked at the orbital display, where Advantageous position turned in its slow, patient orbit, and at the escalation confirmation on her secondary screen, and at Ren Adeyemi standing in the borrowed light of a borrowed room on a world that was, by every formal metric, not yet legally hers. "Now," Sivith said, "we wait, and we don't give them a reason to move faster than they have to." Ren nodded. Then, after a moment, "There's still some tea. It's probably terrible by now." "I have not tried it yet," Sivith said. "And I suspect cold tea is no worse than warm tea for someone using a conversion kit." Ren filled both vessels without being asked. The sparrow was back in the eaves, invisible in the dark outside, making small sounds that her membrane didn't bother translating, because they didn't mean anything to anyone, except, presumably, other sparrows. Sivith held the vessel in 3 of her 6 fingers. It was warm. Through the conversion kit's chemical processing, she received something she could only describe as brown and old. And the feeling that someone has been in this room before and will be again. She decided that was enough. For now. She decided she would come back tomorrow and read the human astronomical records from 3 centuries ago, the first ones. The ones without any equipment at all. Just people looking up. She wanted to know what they had been hoping to see.